My name is Patti Bernard. I'm a member of the Nevada Women's History Project. We are at Carmel of Reno. Today is Saturday, June 3rd. Carmel of Reno is located on a hillside outside of Reno. It is a beautiful facility that the nuns have done. They have planted the hillsides for the deer and the rabbits. They have beautiful views to contemplate God. Today we are speaking with Sister Michael Fox and Sister Joan Williams. Sister Michael Fox came very near the beginning of the monastery, and Sister Joan came 14 years later. Amazingly, they were at the same monastery back east when they started out. Sister Michael, can you talk a little bit about your early life, please?
Well, I was born in Dayton, Ohio, in 1928, so I'm 89 years old right at the moment. I was always trying to keep up with my dad when we went to church when I was little, because he had such long legs, and I used to just almost run to try to keep up. And that's my memory of going places with my dad, was trying to keep up. But with my mother, she was more my speed, and I think she knew that I couldn't keep up if my legs weren't that long. Now they are. And when I was little, my mother used to say, just don't go out in the street. Play. You can play if your brothers are with you and kids in the neighborhood, but don't go by yourself into the street, because in those days there weren't that many cars, but there were a few, and so she was always very careful of me. And I remember one time I must have been very young, but I escaped from my mom without any clothes and ran out into the street. I had to sit under the dining room table and dust the table legs for my penance.
You talk about your parents. What were their names?
My father was Joseph Frederick Fox, and my mom was Ruth Clara Wahlberg, Walburg, and they were both from Cincinnati, but moved to Dayton because of Pop's work. He was a buyer for a wholesale drug company.
What about your schooling? Were you a good student? What did you like?
I was a fair student. I went to Julian High School, but before that I went to Corpus Christi Grade School. And in high school, we had moved from the house that we lived in to a closer place, and it only took me 5 minutes to get to school. And sometimes I was a little lax about getting up early, and so I had to be kind of reminded by my mom that it was time to go to school and the kids are walking by. So they had to go down our street in order to get to the high school. And I could run to the high school in 5 minutes.
Did you have some favorite subjects?
I think I liked history a lot, and I still do. And history is a real favorite for the books that I read.
Sister Joan, tell us a little bit about your early life.
Yes, which was quite a while ago. I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, September 21, 1927. And I have wonderful memories of Kentucky. It's horse country. And my mother was very much into equestrian shows. In fact, we had a picture early on, pitcher as in pouring liquid, that she had won first place in a show. However, she died when I was 7. And shortly, when I was about 6, we moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, and I grew up between Mount Lookout and Hyde Park in Cincinnati. But back to Kentucky, one of my earliest memories is of the Derby, because that was big then. And it was not just a local event, but practically international. And the women would wear hats and gloves, and it was quite the thing. And I remember I would be given one of the betting forms, and I would get to mark one, but of course I couldn't read. So I don't know how much use it was.
Who were your parents?
My father was Thomas Moore Williams, and my mother was Jewel McDonough. That was her maiden name, and she was an Irish beauty, very, very beautiful, which was slightly an obstacle when people would look at me and say, "She doesn't look like Jewel." But it didn't affect my personality, I don't think.
And when you were in school, did you have a special subject, or what did you like?
I wasted school. I loved to read, and I read everything under the sun, but to the detriment of my class.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved any subject. I read about everything.
Sister Michael,
Yeah.
I'd like to take you back to your decision to enter the convent. How old were you, and what were the motivating factors of you entering the cloister?
Well, I was 18 years old when I entered, and one of the main things that I guess it was the result of a retreat that we had at school. So one of the main things I wanted to do was to enter a community where you could pray for priests, and that they needed some prayer to keep going with their own vocations, So that was my idea, and it was something that was the retreat director sort of put in my mind by talking about how much the priests needed to be backed up by prayer. So.
Was there a decision on which order that you were going to choose?
Well, when I was in grade school, the Sisters of Charity were the teachers, and
Yeah.
so they were very good about pointing out what kind of things you should be trying to put in your life, when you grew up. And so the sisters were always talking about prayer and being on time for church, which is, when you're younger, not always the thing that you think of.
And what order were they?
Sisters of Charity of Mount St. Joseph on the Ohio.
Were they Dominican, Benedictine, Carmelite,
No, Sisters of Charity.
Sisters of Charity.
Uh-huh. Sisters of Charity of Mount St. Joseph on the Ohio. That's their full title.
That's their full time?
My mother's sister, blood sister, was one of those Sisters of Charity, and we used to go visit her often. I think that probably had a lot to do with my vocation also. My dad's, I think she was an aunt, but I'm not sure what relation she was now. I can't remember. But I used to go with him just to visit her, and she always wanted me to be a Sister of Mercy.
Yeah.
And so you picked the Carmel
Uh-huh.
order.
Yes, because of that retreat that we had, and that the Carmelites were an order for people who wanted to live a very intense prayer life.
And that was a goal of yours.
Yes.
Sister Joan,
Yes.
same question. You are a young gal. Your life is in front of you. Certainly, there was a social life after reading your autobiography. Tell us a little bit why you felt the need to enter an order, and was there a choice between what type of an order you looked at?
This is a favorite topic. As I shared earlier, I graduated when I was 17, and when people hear that I became a Carmelite nun, which at that point was cloistered and one of the most penitential orders, they said, "You were so young." And the thing is, it was during World War II. I was much more aware of that life is passing. And in fact, as I told you earlier, my roommate's brother that I was to go to the Christmas dance with was shot down over Burma. And we went to his wake instead of to a Christmas dance. And it just made life much more serious. And when we went for vacation to Virginia Beach, it was obvious that there was a war. The warships were anchored out at sea, and anti-aircraft guns were mounted in the dunes on the beach. So that's the background of thinking, besides parties and everything else. The whole culture was like if we went to the movies, there would be the newsreels first of what was happening around the world. That, and I think the fact that I went to a small boarding school in about 50 miles outside of Cincinnati. I think the whole enrollment was about 50. And in the formal library where they had the concerts and things, there was a bookcase that had glass doors, and it wasn't for the students. Our library was different. But I was up there one day and I thought, oh, I wonder what those books are. And the book that I took out happened to be Teresa of Avila, The Way of Perfection. And I just fell in love with the whole thing. So for me, there was never a choice of orders. When I went to see the Archbishop in Cincinnati to tell him that I was going to be a Carmelite, he said, well, the Dominicans are right here up the street. Why don't you become a Dominican? And I said, no, I want to be a Carmelite. Because for me, the life of Carmel was prayer, penance, solitude. And I think as an extrovert, I gravitated toward those kinds of things as sort of a balance, perhaps. Maybe it was unconscious. But I also feel that a vocation is a very relational thing. My mother had died. My father had remarried a divorced Catholic. And I did a lot of thinking. You know, as the saying goes, this life is not a rehearsal. This is it. So it was a clear decision for me. And at that time, even then, we preferred in Carmel to have people at least in their 20s. So I think it was Archbishop Ritter wrote a letter for me giving the nuns permission to accept me. And once when I went back, I said to my novice misters, because I was not an easy postulant or novice to handle, and I said, "Why did you keep me?" And she always thought before she spoke, and she said, "We took your background into account," which I wasn't sure how to take, but I knew what she meant. So it's, I just can't say how different the culture was, because even my friends at 18 and 19 were getting engaged. Their fiance was going to war. It was a whole different atmosphere.
Well, let me take you then to your entering the convent. And what was the most difficult thing that you had to change as a postulant?
Well, one of the questions that the prioress asked is, can you learn to obey? And I said, "Oh yes." Well, that was not true. So I think the very things that drew me, the silence and solitude, were the things that were so difficult. And Carmel is not about an exterior journey as much as it is the internal journey. And that's what was hard.
And Sister Michael, what about you? What was, when you entered the monastery, what was the most difficult or change that you had to meet?
I think it was what I interpreted as a lack of freedom, and you couldn't do what you wanted to do. You you followed the rule, and what kind of a task was given to you, and I didn't have a whole lot of struggle with whether I should stay or not, but once in a while, I would think, why are we doing this?
Right.
And eventually, I came to a real sense of peace, that this is where I belonged, and Carmel to me was, it was everything that I was looking for in religious life. I didn't want to be a teacher or a nurse, and those were the things that
Right.
Kids around me were going in for, because it was something women could do in those days, and as Joan said, it was wartime, and when I was thinking about it, it's like all the fellows that I knew were 18 or 19 years old and were going into the Army or the Navy or something, and some of them never came back.
Right.
And that was just a big heartache, It brought the war really close, and we lived on a very quiet street, and it got quieter because the boys were gone, and what that meant, was they were training for war, and
Mm-hmm.
I guess the Second World War was one of those things in the background of everybody's life at that time when you were growing up. I remember asking my mother, why do people have to have such conflicts? And I said, Japan and China have been fighting for years, you know. And I listened to the radio, you know, and got the news that way, and that's how I knew that China and Japan were at war often. And I just thought that there was something in life that was really meaningful, and it seemed to be religious life was the thing. And Carmel, I read because one of the teachers that I had a special relationship, or she really loved the little flower, Saint Therese, and so I thought if she could do it, so could I, because she was a French, and she wanted to enter when she was, what was it, 17?
15.
15, yeah, she was very young, and I thought, well, I can hack this. I'm older.
Let me take you up then to your name, the name that you chose for your given name. What was your thought?
Saint Michael the Archangel was a very favorite person to pray to when I was going to school, in high school. And I heard so much about Saint Michael the Archangel, and it went into my memory for a wonder. And when I was asked what I would like to have for a name in Carmel, when novice mistress asked me, I said I would like to have I wanted to have a woman's name, but a saint that had really made some, it was an influence. And at the time, the one that I was asking for was not available, so I had to take St. Michael, which I had great devotion to him too, but the name I requested was already in use.
What name was that?
I'm trying to remember.
Magdalene?
Magdalene, right.
Magdalene.
Yes.
There's an old story, but it still explains a lot. A friar, a monk, went to get his driver's license, and the clerk said, "What is your name?" And the monk said, "You mean my name in the world or my name in religious life?" And the clerk said, "Where in the hell do you think you are?" So my name in religion was Teresa, and we had a title, Teresa of Jesus, and that came from my reading and my devotion. Teresa of Avila is the foundress of the Carmelites, along with John of the Cross. And so it was, I didn't choose it actually. I wanted my father's name. I wanted Sister Mary Thomas, but I was given Teresa, and then I was happy with it. And this is the narrative account, so you'll have to stop me if it goes on too long. But my understanding is that the reason we had our names were changed, it's in religious life, there's a collegiality, an equality. And especially in 16th century Spain, there was lady and princess. Those titles were not to be used, so we were all called sister. And the names were religious names were given because the family history and the family name was very influential, and you were supposed to forget all that. So, and after Vatican II, the theology shifted and reinforced the idea that it's our baptism that makes us members of the body of Christ. And my baptismal name is Joan, so I went back to Joan. So that's a long answer to a short question.
But that's a wonderful answer, thank you. You came to Nevada when, Sister Michael?
I came a few years after this foundation was made, and it was the sisters. There were 8 of them. They were living on Virginia Street in a temporary house, and we didn't come up here onto the hill until we had the monastery in 1958. So I spent 4 years down there on Virginia Street in that temporary house. And then the prioress was Mother Angela, and the sub-prioress was Sister Ann Clem. And they were given permission, because at the time we couldn't leave the monastery without permission of the bishop or higher authority. So they got permission to search for a place of some kind of ground that would house a monastery. We couldn't build at that time earlier because building was expensive, and we didn't have that kind of money to build a place up here. But they came, and they had we had a postulant who was a wonderful woman, and she had no idea what her husband had just died recently, and she had no idea why she wanted to be a nun. And she only lasted 2 weeks, but in that time, we made a wonderful friend, and she was a real estate agent actually, and she was the one who looked around and found this area for us that we could eventually move to. So I don't remember a whole lot about how that was all arranged, because I wasn't in the positions that they were.
You
I have a bad
know
memory.
why the Carmelites came to Reno in the first place?
They were invited by Bishop Dwyer to make what we call the foundation, and you have to have some kind of invitation to move from your original house. I entered in Indianapolis, Indiana, along with Joan. She was a year ahead of me, I think, and was what we used to call the little mother, somebody who could give you the ropes and, take you around and explain what you were supposed to be doing in your capacity, whatever it was. So anyway,
Were there many Carmelite orders out west when they opened Reno?
I think there were maybe, let's see, I think Santa Clara was an older-
California
yeah.
had a lot.
Yeah, California. I don't think there were any in the diocese here.
No.
And the diocese took up the whole state at that
Right.
time.
And do you know why Bishop Dyer invited your order to Nevada?
He wanted contemplative nuns, and that's the order to which we belong is contemplative. That is, we don't have an outside. What would you call it? My brain isn't working too well.
Like apostolate.
Apostolate, yes. Our apostolate was prayer,
Mm-hmm.
and praying for the church, and mostly for the priests. At least that's what we were encouraged to pray for, the priests.
And Sister Joan, I have some wonderful photographs here
Yes.
of the nuns when they first came to Reno, and some of them showing your dress. Can you talk a little bit about the dress that you wore in the beginning and how it has changed?
The habit is based on the 16th century dress of the poor in Spain. And that's true of most orders, that their dress evolved from the peasants. Like our habit was unbleached tunic material for the inner tunic, and the outer brown tunic was wool. And that's what the peasants wore. And it was very simple. Some of the habits are more elaborate. But our habit, and as I say, it's true of most orders, it's based on the dress of the peasants of the time that the order was founded. Because part of the aim of an order is to be poor, to be simple, and so they copied the dress of the poor. And that's why there weren't like hoop skirts and all kinds of bustles and everything like that, crinoline. Some of the habits were more elaborate. But that's my understanding. And then it evolved. The other part of your question, it evolved because wool became very expensive. And it's just like a meatless diet. We ate fish instead of meat, but fish became a luxury. And it was the same with the material of the habits. Like our tux, the headdress, was unbleached linen. And that became very expensive and also hard to maintain. We didn't wash the wool too often, but when we did, it would shrink, of course. So it wasn't poor anymore. And people think that, and sometimes I say this at open house, I'm usually at the front door, and people say, "You're not wearing a habit?" And I say, "No. Do you want the long account or the short account?" And they say, "Well, I have to be home in half an hour." So I'm distracting my own narrative. Oh, I know. It's that people think that we woke up with short hair or long hair and slacks and sweaters and stripes and everything. But people have no idea of the evolution of changes, of tradition of 4 centuries.
Yeah.
So, like, I can remember some of our early discernment. We wore a cincture that went to the floor, and often our liturgy involved kneeling, and you would step on the cincture by mistake and sort of stumble.
And the cincture is like
The
slip,
belt.
Rope
a-
type.
a
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
that's what it looked like.
Right. And then I can remember many a meeting about should we shorten the sleeves and narrow them. The sleeves were more like a vestment almost. They would come down to about here. They were very full. And so it was a whole process of discernment. It wasn't like, let's get rid of this habit, you know. It was very difficult for some people because the habit identified them. It was their identification. It could be their identification as a nun, as separate, as different. And so now a lot of our clothes, the sisters are experts at thrift stores or recycling places. They know where they are. And also, I remember Sister Ann Clem was one of the most popular and successful debutantes in Washington, D.C. Her family came from Texas oil and banking. And she would, people would give us, they would clean out their closets and give us their clothes that they weren't wearing or couldn't wear. And that would go on the banister. And that's where Sister Ann Clem got her clothes, was just from hand-me-downs. And that too even was evolving, because in the beginning, when we first started wearing secular clothes, you could wear brown. So we would have a brown skirt or a brown dress, and then pretty soon there were stripes in the brown, and then there would be polka dots, and finally somebody said, you know, I don't think we're really wearing just brown anymore, and it became more open, whatever was on sale. But one of my very favorite stories, I came home from shopping, and Sister Ann Clem's, it was a polo shirt I had on, and she said, that's a nice shirt. And I said, oh, Sister Ann, they were 2 for $10. I wish I'd gotten 2. I only got 1. And she said, 1 is enough. Mm-hmm. And I've always remembered that. That was almost like her philosophy. And it's something I've tried to claim for myself. 1 is enough.
When the sisters first came, the group of 8, they stayed with the Dominican sisters in their convent until there was a house that they could move to. And as I said, we had friends who found that house, and the bishop approved that of it and all. That's how it started. 829 North Virginia. And that's how we used to speak of it. It was when we had moved up here, 829 North Virginia.
And then you built the present facility. How did your life and interaction with the community change?
There were people who were very, very interested in helping us. First, they would ask if we could design Christmas card for, I think it was for 2 or 3 people. Sister Ann and Mother Angela were able to design little cards, for Christmas or whatever the people wanted. And it just sort of took off. Everybody who was interested in art of some way, would try to help. And the business part was that we were, I don't know whether you'd say obliged, but we felt that we needed to support ourselves with some kind of what do they call it? Remunerative work. So they used to make vestments for the priests, but that, could only be so much. And then we had done a little printing in Indianapolis, where we came from. So somebody suggested maybe we could print cards or do something like that. And it just grew like very slowly, but that's what the way that we tried to support ourselves. However, it wasn't something that we could build a monastery with, or, we just had to depend on the goodness of people who were our benefactors. We started out with a small amount of people, and now it's like our outreach through the mail and selling cards and that sort of thing. It's not just selling to sell, each person gets a thank you, and we get friends that way. And people write to us, and I think that we decided eventually that we couldn't make vestments and do other kind of sewing for people, and printing and all that. We had to just choose one thing that we could do well. So that's how we got into printing cards, religiously motivated, most of them.
The card, I would call it an industry, although it isn't, but you're the portion of the cards I know you are heavily involved in. And you have some beautiful cards, and I understand you also did calligraphy.
Yes.
What is the inspiration what is the thought that goes into a card as you compose it?
This one was just something, I don't know whether this was a song or what. All night, all day, there are angels watching over me, and it just sort of tickled my fancy, as it were. And I thought that would make a nice card for kids, and this is the angel watching over somebody.
Do you get your inspiration immediately, or does it just kind of gradually
Well, I
grow?
used to be better at it than I am now, because I turned 89. But I used to just love to do artwork, and sometimes it was arty and sometimes it wasn't. It was just you win some and lose some.
So your expression was really through art.
Yes. I used to do a lot of calligraphy, and one person who was very, I think I did a lot for him, was Mr. Bliss, Bill Bliss. Early on, it wasn't too good, but he thought it was, so when we started calligraphy, and then there was someone, I forget who came to help us and give little art classes, for a time. It wasn't much, but it wasn't that long. Maybe that was a way we could do one thing and everybody could work at it, because you needed somebody who could use a printing press, in fact several, and people who came up with ideas, even if they couldn't draw them, that they would give me kind of sentences or things that I could explore with. A lot of us went to calligraphy class, and I know the rest of the sisters. There are very good artists. I'm not the only one that tries to do something on a card, and we have a lot of talent in the community, I think, and that people come up with the most unique ideas for their cards.
Sister Joan, how about you? I know that you are more in a literary bent and that you had a specific skill, even though you came when you were ill. You really got into, you were an editor of something?
An editor of, it was an international Carmelite journal, Encounter. Yes, I've always loved reading and writing. I can lose myself anytime in writing. I think that, what is it, the unexamined life is not worth living or something. So for me, like journaling and writing is an introspection, and it's always been part of my journey. Early on, we weren't allowed to use our names, so some articles that I wrote are under written by a Carmelite nun with no name or identification. And that brings up actually your question, your earlier question about involvement with the broader community. Canonically, there are apostolic religious orders, teachers, nurses, missionaries, and then there's contemplative. And that is really an artificial division. It's like the Martha and Mary story in the gospel, that which is used sometimes to reinforce the idea that Mary has chosen the better part, that she's simply sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Martha is hustling around fixing dinner. But really, it's, as I say, it's an artificial division, because both aspects are involved in religious life. It's just the expression is different. Like, we don't do nursing or teaching or missionary work, but prayer is missionary. And that's what I feel our apostolate is. And the way that we evolved into a broader interaction with, quote, the world, we responded, and we still will respond to invitations. Could you come to the mothers group and talk about prayer? Or could you visit the parish and share on contemplative life? So it's a response rather than a going out and seeking work or invitations. It's what Sister Michael was saying, that people want to know more about prayer. And since our life is, a life of prayer, we should be able to speak about it. However, I think we can only share what we have. So our own individual life of prayer and reading and the divine office, that's our basis, that's our foundation, that's why we're here. And you were saying, like, at the end of my life, how do I feel, what my contribution has been? I would hope that it's that my life of prayer is a contribution toward peace. We pray a lot about peace and ecology, to be in right relationship with nature. Like, we're careful about the lights and recycling, the little things that we can do, because not everyone is called to be a savior in a visible way, but being faithful to little things for me, is very much what the contemplative life is about. And I do feel, I mean, there's even been scientific studies that sick people who are prayed for get better faster. Even scientifically, they've done the studies. I think it was Stanford. So I don't see contemplation or a contemplative life as something passive. I see it as something very passionate and alive and working for everybody, not just for our own purification.
Prayer is an energy, and it goes out from from the prayer. That it does its thing for people, and we're here. I think it was. She was a great person, and she died during the Second World War. She and her sister were imprisoned and executed by the Nazis. It was a terrible thing. She was Jewish, and they were getting rid of all the Jews in the area.
Edith Stein?
Edith Stein, yes. I thought it begins with an E, I think.
Oh, I know the feeling.
Yeah, Edith Stein. And she said, our vocation is to stand before God on behalf of everyone, no matter who. So that impressed me and tremendously, you know, that was what she felt was the call of Carmelites during that terrible period, to stand before God for everyone else.
And do you feel then that is
That still holds for me.
your
Yeah.
mission, that you feel that you have successfully?
Well, I don't know how successful, but I try. And it's a thing that I think about anyway. Whenever I pass that picture of her in the library, I always think of that. So many people, how 6 million people were slaughtered, you know, for what? Some crazy person that wanted to rule the world. And it just it speaks to me, that photograph. Well,
As we close this interview, do you have some final thoughts, Sister Michael? I
think that prayer is our vocation. You know, I think it was Edith Stein that it was that had said, we stand before God on behalf of everyone. And when I look out the window, sometimes I just think, everyone, you know, and it goes beyond us and beyond the city. We're here for others, and it's not just our getting to be a contemplative, quote, you know. We're just at the service of everyone, but it's sort of a hidden kind of a thing, and if people appreciate it and know about it, that's fine. But if they don't, it's an energy that goes out, and we're part of the whole world. You know, the world is I think Joan said that earlier. You know, that's what Saint Teresa would say. The world is in flames, it, and we want to do something about it. And our doing something about it is more prayer life and trying to just think of others, being ourselves, but trying to put that energy of prayer out there somewhere where it's needed. And it's bigger than we are, and it's hard to put into words.
To go back a little bit to our interaction with the broader community, now when we have a speaker, we have on our website constant contact, and we inform people that they're welcome to come, and we publicize like theologians or scripture scholars. So that's one way of a broader interaction with the, I hate using the term the world, because we're all part of the world. But to narrow down the idea, I think prayer is, at least for me, it's very relational. It's a relationship. And as Sister Michael was saying, it's a relationship not just for ourselves, but for the world, for everybody. And it can take different forms. And the contemplative life, as Michael was saying, is certainly a hidden form. But fidelity in little things does carry an energy. And love is energy. And our motto, the Carmelite motto, is, as the Lord zelo zelatus sum, as the Lord lives, in whose sight I stand. So there's a zeal and enthusiasm that's part of energy that goes out, that is not that public. So it is difficult to explain. I mean, how do you explain love? The energy of love, what people do for love. And a contemplative, for me, is someone who's in love with God. And to share that through prayer. When I first thought of a religious vocation, first I thought of being a social worker, helping people. Then I thought of being a missionary. And then I was reading Teresa of Avila, and I thought, well, you know, as a social worker or a missionary, I could do good, I could help people in a certain part of the geography. But if I were leading a life of prayer, I could reach everybody in the whole world. And that to me is what I do.
It has been an honor for me. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Well, as the epistle said this morning, if we put everything, there wouldn't be enough books to hold it all.
Yeah.
Well, you have carried on your mission statement of your order very, very well.
Well,
And
the questions are important.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks you.
So thank you too.
Thank you.